There's a strong chance that I could get arrested for what I'm disclosing here, but the public deserves to know what has been discovered. I should warn you that what I'm about to tell you may completely change how you feel about life, so if you wish to maintain your sanity, then I suggest that you stop reading this now. To limit the possibility of me getting caught, I'm not going to disclose my name or anyone else involved in the events that have transpired. I work for NASA, and about 6 years ago, we sent 4 probes into space on a course for Jupiter's moon, Europa. For those of you who don't know, Europa's surface is covered in a thick ice layer, and it's been believed for many years now that beneath the ice is an ocean. And if there's an ocean, then that creates the possibility of life. The reason you never heard about this project is because we believe that the intense publicity we would receive from the press may compromise the mission. Regulating these things takes a lot more work than you might think, so we did it in secret to save us the time of constant press interviews. The probes were taken by spacecraft, and once there would be scattered across 4 corners of the moon by AI-controlled miniature crafts. They would then drill a hole into the ice, and the probes would be deployed into whatever was beneath it. The probes themselves were very impressive pieces of technology. I won't go into detail about how they were made, but they have a highly sophisticated AI control that would allow them to navigate themselves around Europa's ocean. They were also equipped with high-quality recording devices with night vision capability of showing colors, microphones so that we could see and hear what they did, mechanical arms to analyze any samples found, and were also designed to withstand over 9,000 pounds of ocean pressure. After those 6 years, the probes finally arrived. We were notified about this 35 minutes later, as they were programmed to send a signal to us once they had reached the destination, and it takes a while for it to reach Earth from that distance. So everything we saw on their cameras happened about a half hour beforehand. We observed each probe's journey on a split screen, kind of like a 4-player video game. Each probe waited for each other to land on Europa before the craft started drilling, so they could all start exploring what lay beneath. It took about an hour, but before long the probes were underneath the surface. Our suspicions were indeed correct. There was, in fact, an ocean underneath the ice, and it seemed as though it covered the planet, as all the probes were submerged in water. The ocean was expectedly dark, and even with the night vision, the probes had to activate their inbuilt torches so they could get a better look of the place. Each probe started to submerge further, but it wasn't long before one discovered what we were looking for. Probe 1 was approached by a never-before-seen alien life form. The room back on Earth where it was being observed was silenced in shock, before everyone yelled a victorious cheer at the discovery that alien life did indeed exist on Europa. Needless to say, we were thrilled. The creature itself was about 6 feet long and resembled a giant silver tadpole. It had a single white glowing eye on the front of its head with several thin tendrils around what we assumed to be its mouth. Just behind its head were 4 tentacles on each side, each slightly shorter than its tail. It was stationary and just staring at Probe 1, its tentacles gently flowing with the water movements. Before we knew it, more of these creatures had approached Probes 2 and 3, and all of them stared at it with little movement. Logic dictated that they were merely investigating the probes, as they clearly had never seen anything like them before. Still, the fact that they were halted while staring in the face of these unknown creatures was a little odd. Suddenly, several others of these creatures could be seen in the background of each screen. We could see their glowing eyes moving as they swarm upwards. The probes took note of this and looked upwards as to what they were all swimming towards. They were gathering around the holes made in the ice. What was even more peculiar was they seemed to start swimming around its shape. At first we thought that maybe this was a primal instinct, like when you put food in a fish tank and they all swim up to get at it. But then we noticed that some kind of substance was appearing around them. There was what appeared to be a white cloud forming between them as they continued to circle and dart around the point of entry. Then they all scattered. Once the cloud dispersed, we could finally see what they were doing. The point of entry had frozen over. Of course, it was a lot thinner than what it had been, but still, it was frozen. They had actually released some kind of chemical, which I assume may have been liquid nitrogen, and tried to fix the hole. Now, this raised a myriad of questions. Why would they do this? What evolutionary reason would they have to behave in such a way? Had this happened before in order for them to evolve in this way? What was also of interest was the fact that as the probes moved, the creatures that had approached them seemed to tail behind, almost as if they were keeping an eye on them. The probes all submerged further, and it wasn't long before they reached the bottom. It was surprisingly shallow on each side of the planet. The bottom of this ocean was covered in what seemed to be a swamp-green, furry seaweed that swayed in the water on top of a dark surface. What was particularly interesting was that, despite the difference in terrain on each side, the weed was the exact same. There was no variation in color or different plant species. It was all identical. Speaking of the terrain, the environment the Probe 1, the north side of Europa, had found was nothing special. The same terrain seemed to continue for several miles and resembled what you usually find in the shallow waters of Earth. Probe 2, which was positioned on Europa's south, found that its terrain was more curved. The curve would be very difficult to notice at first. Again, it spread on for miles, but it was certainly there. What's more was that in the distance one could make out more structures, two to be precise. They could be seen in the form of shadows and extended into the sky, where each curved in a different position. The terrain on Probe 3's side was similar to Probe 1's. However, this side had structures of its own. From a distance, it could be seen in a row that there were what appeared to be large mountains in the shape of dark dorsal fins. They were also relatively the same size and shape, which was quite impressive for a structure that formed naturally. Probe 4, which was on the opposite side of Probe 3, seemed to have landed on a small mountain. We could tell this because it landed just to the edge of it, and it could be made out that beneath was more land. What was significantly different from the other sides, however, was the fact that this side had a large section that didn't have any seaweed. There was still some there, but when the probe moved along, it came to an edge of the seaweed, where 4 miles stretched out. There was a piece of land that was made of what looked like a rough metal. It was very difficult to tell what kind, or if it even was metal, but that was the best we could describe it. As the probes continued to explore their respective areas, there was something that became quite apparent. The only creatures that seemed to live down here were the silver tadpoles. Aside from the individuals following the probe, these things were everywhere on every corner of the planet, just swimming around all over the place. It was very odd how there wasn't a more diverse ecosystem, that these guys didn't have any kind of predator or prey. The first animal life of this world, perhaps. The very first animal life of this world, perhaps. But if that was the case, how did they evolve into such complex beings without any kind of diversity? What was also noteworthy was the fact that very few of them actually got close to the ocean floor. In fact, most of them seemed to be avoiding it at all costs, as if it was something to be afraid of. I started to get a very bad feeling, like we were interfering with something that should have just been left alone. Unfortunately, there was nothing that we could do. Like I said, the probes had long since done everything shown on screen, so even if we sent a signal for them to stop, it probably wouldn't have reached them until it was too late. Probe 3's AI decided that it should take a sample of the seaweed for analysis. They wouldn't be coming back to Earth, but if it could get a high-quality picture of it, we could potentially be able to analyze its possible biology. It reached out its mechanical arm towards the weed on the ground, grabbing a handful with its pincers and started to pull. To our surprise, it didn't come out of the ground. And considering the probe's strength, the weed's supposed similarity to Earth's seaweed plants, it should have come out just as easily. The probe continued to pull and tug at it, but it just didn't come out. Suddenly, the silver tadpole that had been following Probe 3 rushed in front of it, its tentacles rapidly shaking and trying to push it back. If I didn't know better, I would have said that it was trying to tell the probe to stop. Unfortunately, this didn't register with Probe 3's AI, and it continued to tug. The tadpole was getting desperate, rapidly waving its tentacles back and forth as it pushed harder to get it to stop, and when that didn't work, it wrapped itself around the probe's arm. The 4 other tentacles stretched out and grabbed onto several other sections of its arm and seemed to be trying to pull at it. It was trying to break it off. The probe continued to pull at the weed, but to no avail. All of a sudden, even more tadpoles rained down from above and engulfed Probe 3 with their embrace, all pulling at different components in order to disassemble it. They were succeeding. We could just about see the sparks and electricity that were starting to fly about, and the camera was beginning to break up. Probe 3 did not let go of the weed and continued to pull. Several people in the room irrationally yelled, "Stop!" But of course this wasn't going to work. With one final yank, just before the probe went offline, the weed was ripped up from the ground. And with that, connection was lost. Silence dominated the room for a couple of minutes. And then we heard it. Rattling through the speakers came a low, bellowing sound. The best I could compare it to was a whale's call, but even by those standards, it was incredibly ominous. What frightened me the most was the fact that it didn't come from just one of the probe's microphones, but all three of them. All the silver tadpoles that we could see on screen stopped in their tracks and looked down towards the ocean floor. They didn't move a muscle, they just stopped and stared. The bellowing came again, the screens vibrated as it rang. Then we noticed something on probe 1's screen. Something was glowing. The probe looked downward to see that what was once covered in seaweed was now a smooth, glowing orange surface. It wasn't the same shade. It seemed to get brighter as the surface went inwards. And this stretched for miles on end. Magma, perhaps. No, it couldn't be. It wasn't moving, and there was no way magma could surface this fast without us noticing. But then the colors started to move south, and before long, the surface was a pitch black. Everyone in the room was dumbfounded. What the hell were we looking at? But then it did something that made my blood run cold. Slowly, a mass of seaweed moved across it, covering up the black surface, and in the same amount of time, it uncovered it again. It had blinked. That's when we realized that this whole time we hadn't been exploring the ocean floor. This was a single, gargantuan creature. An ear-splitting screech emanated from the speakers. The structure in the background of Probe 1's camera came to life, violently waving and crashing against the planet's ice surface. The surface that the probe had been exploring rapidly lifted and crashed into it. Probe 2 was offline. Probe 4 witnessed a long, colossal mass move up into the sky, then stretch outwards. Due to its gigantic size, we didn't see how far or where it went, but after we heard an enormous crashing sound, we knew that most certainly it hit the other side of the planet. It was at this moment that we realized that Probe 4 was sitting on a giant limb. The surface beneath moved upwards. The other limb pushed the probe with it, but the speed of the movement through the water tore it apart before it could even reach the other side of the moon. Probe 4 was offline. The last probe standing was Probe 1. But the uprush caused by the gargantuan movements had caused the probe to crash against the surface. It was barely online, but we could still just about see what was going on. The mass below was, from what we could see, constantly thrashing from side to side whilst roaring like an angry caged animal. We could now see that it had two eyes, but even though the probe was further away, each eye still made up the entirety of the probe's vision. When it came into view, the silver tadpoles all rapidly swarmed towards the gargantuan at once, but before we could see what they were going to do, it rushed forward and crushed the probe against the surface. Probe 1 was offline. Silence. Nobody said a word. I don't think anybody even breathed for at least 5 minutes. I was overwhelmed by a mixture of emotions: fear, confusion, dread, despair. After a long time, the administrator finally spoke, and it was a miracle that anybody could after what we had just witnessed. He told us it was vital that we keep this incident a secret, to act as though it never happened. He explained that the knowledge of this creature's existence would cause widespread panic, and that the public deserves to be protected from the horror that resides within our solar system. Several members of our team were driven to madness. They were committed to mental hospitals. Many even committed suicide. And I guess the knowledge that something like this exists is just too much to bear for some. I'm surprised I've kept my sanity from all this time. But I believe that the public has the right to know this information. It's the only way we can prepare for the worst should it happen. I'm still not sure what the gargantuan is and how it got here, but my main theory is that Europa is a prison that was created for it. The silver tadpoles were something like its guards. It would make sense as to why they were following the probes around and tried to stop them from pulling at the fur. What I can say is this: Europa is still there. It hasn't cracked open or disappeared, so it's safe to say that the gargantuan is still inside of it. Hopefully the tadpoles managed to subdue it. Even so, everyone needs to be prepared for if this thing escapes its cage, because if this thing gets out, I have no idea what that will mean for us. Be prepared. Sometimes a town's darkest secrets are the most fun. You listening to what I'm saying, hon? Come outside and leave the sun. It's Red Rover time. And the fun has just begun. The massive line of people undulated for a quarter mile. Even through my sun-drenched eyes, I could see the thousands of interlocked hands that rippled like satin in the moonlight. I placed my elbows on my knees, sucked in a few deep breaths. Within moments, my thundering heart slowed down a bit, and I could feel a second wave of energy rippling through my limbs. The game was a marathon, not a sprint. I needed to conserve my energy if I wanted to win. Behind me, I could hear the frantic howling of the bloodhounds. Each beast had been given the specific scent of a participant and were hunting us down as fast as their empty stomachs allowed them. The bloodhounds were forced to fast every Thursday. Hunger intensifies their viciousness and increases the thrill of the game. I pushed the bloodhounds out of my mind and surveyed the line of bodies in front of me. Breaking through that sea of fence-like arms was all that mattered. My survival depended upon reaching the church on the other side of the woods, which is where the winners declared, and the victory ritual was performed. I watched my friend Jennifer go crashing into a pair of arms in the distance. Her attempt to break through the line was unsuccessful, and the force of the collision sent her crashing to the ground. She started screaming and writhing on the grass moments later. The man she had crashed into must have doused his sleeves in pepper spray, a common trick. Now wasn't the time to be a spectator, though. The bloodhounds grew closer with each passing second, and I, for one, wanted to keep the flesh on my bones. I scanned the line in the distance. I picked up my target. An elderly couple about 50 paces to my right. Although the elderly are known to play the dirtiest tricks, I had to take the risk. I'm a rather small man. The odds that I could overpower the grips of anybody else was slim. So I repositioned myself. I sucked in a final deep breath, and then charged forward with all the speed my legs could muster. The arms I crashed into were as hard as steel, and sent me rebounding to the ground like a falling meteor. My lungs deflated from the force of the blow. All I could do was lay there on the ground and stare up at the starless sky as my aching throat tried to gulp down air. I had fallen for the oldest trick in the book. My targets were wearing costumes, and judging by the strength of their arms, were probably trainers at the local gym. Behind me, I could hear the hungry screams of the bloodhounds. Based on the proximity of their cries, they would arrive any minute. Fear sent my already palpitating heart galloping at an alarming rate. I had underestimated how much time I had left before the bloodhounds arrived. If I didn't break through the line on my next attempt, then I would surely perish. I forced myself to my feet and half jogged, half stumbled back to the starting line. I couldn't afford to lay on the ground for a moment longer. My life depended on reaching the church on the other side of the woods. Within moments, I located my next targets. 2 scrawny teenage boys directly in front of me. Their bodies were too small to be adults in disguise, and I knew that I could crash through their puny arms like a knife splitting a stick of butter, just as I was about to go sprinting forward with what little remained of my strength. The bloodhounds came crashing through the thicket of trees behind us. The sight of the bloodhounds filled me with awe. It amazed me that human beings could run so fast on all fours, even with years of practice. Panic swept through the contestants as the bloodhounds descended upon their prey. The mayor was the fastest of the bloodhounds and overtook his target with ease. I watched in admiration as his naked body soared through the air with precision-like accuracy. Within moments, the young woman whose scent he had been hunting was on the ground, and he let out a guttural victory howl before sinking his teeth into her neck. All around me, bodies were crashing to the earth as the bloodhounds claimed their victims. The sound of tearing flesh and crunching bones soon filled the air, which mixed with the panicked screams of the participants in a blood-curdling cacophony. I tore my eyes away from the sea of naked bodies swarming around me, and I focused on the two teenagers in the distance. Luckily, my bloodhound hadn't located me yet, and I didn't want to stick around long enough to find out who had been assigned to me. For all I knew, it had been my mother, which would make for one bizarre and gruesome death. So after pounding my thighs with my fists to relieve the tension that was forming, I sprinted forward through the darkness. Just as I crossed the halfway point of the field, a hand grabbed me by the ankle and sent me crashing to the ground. Terror filled my lungs as a naked body came writhing up my legs, and a pair of claws went digging into my back. I looked over my shoulder and into the bloodhound's face. Fortunately, I didn't find my mom's green eyes staring back at me, but the bloodshot eyes of the town's electrician. His face was streaked with grime, and his putrid teeth were caked with the gore of his last victim. Right as he was about to sink his teeth into my back, I wheeled around and punched him in the nose. I let out a satisfied yell as his cartilage collapsed beneath my knuckles, and he recoiled from my body like a hand touching a hot stove. I then pushed myself to my feet and continued sprinting across the field. I cleared the arms of the teenagers with ease, just as I had predicted. The moment I passed into the trees beyond the line, I let out a shriek of joy. Victory would soon be mine. All I needed to do was reach the church and claim my reward. I arrived at the church a few minutes later. The moment I passed through the sprawling oak doors, my ears were greeted with an overwhelming din of cheers. I smiled as the game master approached me and draped his arms around my shoulders. "Congratulations, Nolan," he said. "You're this week's winner." He led me over to the buffet table, which had been prepared in my honor, and handed me a plate. "Go. Eat your fill. You deserve it. You're one of the town's elite now, just like your mother. Now sit down and rest. Bloodhound training resumes on Monday, and I want you to be at full strength for your first day." Mom, I'm writing you an email instead of calling because I'm afraid of speaking about this in my own house. I don't know exactly what is happening, but maybe you will. Maybe you know someone who can help. Before you get in the car or make any snap decisions about coming over here, please read all of this email first. John hasn't been acting at all like himself, and I'm responsible for everything that caused this. Please don't tell Grandma. She'll freak out, and that could make things worse. For now, please just keep this between you and me. Let me explain. You know, John's been a fan of paranormal reality shows for as long as we've known him. Well, we were about to celebrate our 5th anniversary, and I wanted to do something special for him. A real paranormal team from the Montgomery area. They advertised a guided investigation for beginners, and I thought I'd surprise him with tickets to one of their ghost hunts. And I did surprise him. He had no idea until the very last minute, even with the new flashlights and walkie-talkies I bought to go with us. The cherry on top was the reservation I made for a pre-investigation meal at his favorite sushi place downtown. Now, I know what you're going to say, Mom. Believe me, as much as we love the paranormal, we share your feelings about respecting the dead. Please keep this in mind as I continue. It's been about a week since we drove out to a small-town suburb of Montgomery for this event. John and I showed up at the town's community center around 10 p.m., and the paranormal investigation crew met us in the auditorium. About a dozen people were expected to turn out, including us. However, our hope for a more one-on-one experience plummeted as the crowd of ghost-hunting hopefuls grew much larger than anticipated. We shared a look of silent annoyance as we observed most of the folks who stood around us. There were about as many ghost adventurer wannabes milling about as you might guess. We thought about leaving when it was clear most of them wouldn't approach the activity with much, if any, sincerity. and we weren't interested in ghost hunting with a big rowdy group. I tried to not let it show, but John could see I was agitated. My plan was falling apart, and my disappointment could have clouded the whole night. But John didn't let me sink too far. He's so good at making lemonade like that. He put his arm around me, and I can remember the sardonic look in his clover green eyes when he said, "Buck up, Buttercup. Way I see it, we can either stay and get away from the hillbillies, make our own little investigation group, just us and the ghosts, or we can go home and watch Patrick Swayze be a Studley ghost while we play with the Ouija board and sip spiked hot cocoa." I wish we'd gone home, but the pep talk was enough to bring me back around. One of the investigators emerged from the panel to greet the large group. She stood out like a ripe strawberry, hard to miss her billowy bright red blouse. Big gold buttons polka-dotted her sleeves and ample upper body like flashy fruit seeds. The woman was as loud as she was bodacious, with a voice that could startle a sailor. Her name was Pam, and she claimed she could bring out the dead with her mediumistic abilities. It wasn't that I didn't believe her, but she seemed less likely to draw lingering specters in for a conversation than she was to drive away everything in a 30-mile radius. When Pam was in the lead, the paranormal team gave us an introduction of their experiences, followed by a tutorial on how to properly collect evidence with devices like electromagnetic field readers, dowsing rods, and digital voice recorders, all of which could be found at each of the locations they'd picked for the night to help lead the investigations. Then Pam gave us some background information about the various locations they'd chosen around this small town, and we were to choose one of them to investigate. The paranormal team would split up to assist with the group's gathering at each location. Almost everyone signed up to attend the abandoned Baptist church and the haunted fire station. But our dumbasses chose the Confederate cemetery. It seemed like the right choice at the time. We were only 2 of 4 people signing up to investigate it. It was as close to a one-on-one as we could get. As John and I were about to leave and look up directions to the cemetery, Pam shouldered her way towards us, declaring we'd be a group together with her. The sound of her raucous voice effectively dampened any newfound hope we'd managed to find for a quiet adventure. Pam invited a pair of meek-looking ladies to join our small group, a plain woman named Kate, and Kate's equally plain, grown daughter, Samantha. Kate and Samantha were nice enough, though quiet. John guessed they disapproved of us once they saw us holding hands. We introduced ourselves as devoted husbands and smiled a little, and they flinched. You would have been so proud of us, Mom. Our group of 5 split up into our respective vehicles and followed directions to the cemetery independently. It was situated on the outskirts of a housing area built within the past 20 years. We drove through town and into the wooded hills to get there, arriving around midnight. In these hills, the only surrounding light traveled from dim and distant porches, scattered amongst layers of old pines and oak trees. The poorly lit corners of rooftops and shutters peeked between black leaves and branches, standing guard like a bunch of retirees with nothing better to do than spy on the neighbors. We parked outside the cemetery in a little grove along the fence posts out front, headlights off, as instructed. Unlike the traditional Gothic iron used to encompass the other burial grounds, this was a sturdy livestock fence. The broad white planks glowed like electric coils in the night. John cracked a joke about the ghosts of the Confederacy being racist, even in death, requiring a gravesite fence so white it didn't even need a whites-only sign. There wasn't an actual sign like that, but there might as well have been. Memorial Day had just passed a few weeks prior, and there were plenty of little Confederate flags stuck in the ground at the base of the headstones. As we strolled up to meet the others at the gate, Pam turned to lead the way, a ribbon of cigarette smoke trailing behind her as she walked. Our shoes crunched layers of dried leaves and twigs as our eyes adjusted to the static darkness. Despite the grip summer weather already had on Alabama, a chill had settled over the cemetery. I was glad we'd worn our sweatshirts as we made our way over to the center of a cluster of well-ordered rows of graves, careful to avoid tripping over the shadowed stones jutting from the ground. I handed John one of the new flashlights and reminded him to turn on the digital recorder, since the paranormal team members had indicated it would be central to the investigations. The 5 of us took a seat on the stone bench in the middle of the cemetery, flanked on all sides by decrepit 200-year-old headstones. Pam led us in a twang prayer before we started. John giggled at Pam's heavy southern accent and how she pronounced the word amen as "Amen." We were tasked with getting evidence from paranormal activity via EVP, or electronic voice phenomena, on the digital recorders, and photos with our phones. We waited several seconds between questions, so the recorder could pick up responses, even if we couldn't hear them in the moment. I don't know quite how to describe the seance, save for how somber it felt to ask personal questions of the corpses beneath our feet, separated from us only by some 250-odd years of layered pine needles, dirt, and the thin wooden boxes cradling them. We asked everything we could think of in the span of about 3 of Pam's cigarettes, taking care to be respectful in our tone and line of questions. It went as peacefully as I had hoped it would, save for the muggy, stagnant clouds of Pam's cigarettes. Another cigarette later, and we were just about ready to say a closing prayer before leaving, when a deep growl rumbled from somewhere behind Kate and Samantha. It was low and menacing, like nothing I'd ever heard before. Everyone went silent. That's how I knew all of us had heard it. I stood up and pointed the flashlight in the direction of the sound, careful to avoid blinding whatever animal might have had its hackles up. But Mom, nothing was there. Hand on your Bible, we put down our recorders and got up to point every light we had in search of whatever had made that threatening sound. I don't know why. I didn't have my hunting rifle in the car at the time, so I didn't even know what I would have done if we discovered whatever had made that sound. Maybe it was the just allure of experiencing something on our haunted seance trip, even if it wasn't ghosts. Whatever the reason, we all spent several minutes combing between the broken tombstones, except for Pam. We walked in pairs, everyone taking 100 pictures of the cemetery like good paranormal investigators, so we could get out there as soon as possible. I admit, as much as I was inclined to believe it was an animal, and not something paranormal, in that moment I really wanted it to be something supernatural. John never left my side while I snapped pictures in the dark. In the distance, the concurrent flicker of Kate and Samantha's phone cameras in the far corner of the cemetery distracted me from my own picture-taking, and I stumbled over a particularly small headstone. As I leaned down to read the markings on the stone, I felt a powerful gust rip past me, nearly knocking me over. It came from my left and picked up speed as it passed through me, bulldozing John to the ground. He didn't get up. Instead, he lay on his back where he fell, gasping like a dying fish. I was stunned. How could anything have barreled through my 6'5" husband like that without also throwing me for a mile? I took a moment to scan the trees for whatever had hit us before dropping to my knees at John's side. Helping him was priority. I barely registered the women shrieking a moment later, tending to John as I was, but the engine of one of the cars roared to life and its headlights lit up the whole cemetery. I had to squint against the onslaught of sudden high beams as they peeled out, leaving us there in the pitch dark. Where was Pam? I didn't have time to worry about her. John still couldn't catch his breath, and a creeping dread was gnawing at the back of my neck. So unsure of how else to help him, I got behind him and crouched to loop my arms through his, pulling his body back towards the car. I stumbled a few times while pulling him along, but he was finally able to get up as we reached the edge of the cemetery, and together we ran to the car and jumped in. When I flipped on the headlights, they revealed the pitch-black shape of an enormous half-man, half-buck, with thick, gnarled antlers twisting skyward, unending against the backdrop of the trees towering over us. It was nothing but shadow, no facial features, no clothing or skin tone, nothing. The figure absorbed every bit of the light that should have revealed it. If it was physical, and if it was just a shadow, it should have disappeared, but it was there, looming over the hood of our car with the most horrifying white eyes. Even in the headlights, its eyes were glowing. I screamed. My guts loosened when it leaned forward and slammed its hooves on the hood. That wasn't my imagination, Mom. The marks are still there to prove it. I threw the car into gear. I got us the hell out of there. I didn't think twice about Pam at that point. I didn't know if she'd left us there, if all 3 of the women had, but in that moment, I just wanted to put as much distance between us and that thing as possible. I looked in the rearview mirror to see if it was following us, but there was nothing. There was nothing on the road behind us. John was silent the whole way back to Montgomery. I figured he was just as rattled as I was, so I didn't push him to recall the terror that we had just experienced. When we got back to the house, John walked up to the porch steps and then stopped and just stood there. I asked him if he'd gotten hurt when we fell in the cemetery, but he didn't answer. Instead, he just rubbed his lower back, and he winced. I noticed I decided I'd call the chiropractor in the morning and request a weekend appointment for him. What I'm about to tell you is why I've given you all this background, because John, he hasn't been himself at all since that night. He sits out on the porch all day, all night, no matter the weather. He hasn't slept. Or if he has, it's been with his eyes open. The whites of his gorgeous brown eyes have turned red. The skin of his eyelids is turning purple. He hasn't touched the food I put in front of him. I tried bringing him water. He simply ignores the glass. He glared at me when I came out of the house. He hasn't said a word. He won't come inside for any reason, even for the bathroom. He smells. I've tried to clean him, but that's when I hear the vicious growl again, the same one that we heard in the cemetery. It doesn't really come from him, though. It's as if the growl is coming from around him. He's been like this for a week. Pam came by yesterday. She was quiet, apologetic. She told us the paranormal team apologized for sending us out there without more of a structured team. And I apologized for John for leaving in a hurry, and I tried to explain what happened and showed her the dents and the ones that creature left in the hood of my car. She said she'd fetched the recorders that we left by the benches and the one that was hidden in her car after a gravelly voice said bitch next to her ear. Pam audibly swallowed as she described it. And she told me that she'd seen Kate and Samantha nailing an inverted cross into the tree nearest our car before they peeled out. I opened my phone to search through the pictures from that night. All we found were dozens of shots that were either too dark or too blurry to decipher. I told Pam that I'd forward the pictures to the paranormal team so they could spend more time analyzing them. Pam mentioned that Kate and Samantha's recordings, they had come back with a lot of what sounded like growling, which corroborated our accounts at least. She said the women never came back, though. They'd emailed their seance recordings, and they never mentioned that they'd left us behind. And I felt some anger in recalling their actions. I don't know their side of it, but their lack of engagement with us makes me suspicious. And with Pam, with what she's shared, I fear we may be dealing with something much worse than the ghosts of some Confederate soldier. John was sitting on the porch like a stoic maniac when Pam tried to approach him. The growl that erupted was louder than I'd heard from him previously. We both took an instinctive step back, and Pam regarded us with bewildered shock. She promised to be in touch, fleeing to her car and pulling out of the driveway quicker than a hummingbird could recite the alphabet. After she left, I went to the toy store and I bought a Ouija board. I don't really know what I thought would happen. The desperation convinced me that it wouldn't hurt to try. I mean, maybe I thought I could communicate with spirits in the cemetery. They'd have the answers. Call it stupid if you want. You do the same for Grandma. If you had no other choice. I took every precaution I could think of. I brought out every religious item Grandma had ever gifted me. I set them up on the kitchen table. I said prayers and lit white candles, and I prepared to ask my questions as to the other side. But as soon as I touched the planchette, heavy footsteps thundered across the porch. I looked up to see John standing square in front of our sliding glass door, not 10 feet away from where I sat. He stood stock still, though I swear the outline of his body in the porch light shivered from head to toe. The air around him vibrated like intense heat waves floating over hot August asphalt. His exhausted eyes searched the inside of the house before finally resting on me. Standing there, staring at me like that, I was terrified of him. Me, a grown man with a kitchen full of weapons at my disposal, and I was deathly afraid of my own husband. My hands left the planchette, and I picked up one of Grandma's wooden crosses. I clutched it tight to my chest. The man that wasn't my John anymore smiled, and that Familiar growl reverberated through the thick glass door between us like a purr. And then he turned and he walked back to his spot on the porch like nothing had happened. I put away the spirit board, but kept all the angel figures and religious items out. Tried to sage the house today, but got the same terrifying reaction that the spirit board inspired last night, so I stopped. Last night, after I finally gave up and I went to bed, I heard chanting outside our bedroom window. I got up to see where the hell it was coming from, hoping that I would find my husband as himself again, but when I peeked outside, I found him still in the same spot on the porch, dozens of flies buzzing around his smiling face. I walked to get the mail this morning, putting as much space between John and me to avoid the smell and his gaze, and when I noticed knobs at his temples, calcifying into what looked like horns or antlers. Pam left behind the digital recorders, and I've listened to everything it captured from that night 100 times. Each time I listen, the recording feels like it gets longer. You can hear us talking and asking our questions, the clink, clink, clink of Kate and Samantha hammering onto the tree, and then John getting knocked down, and Kate and Samantha shriek in the distance, and then there's this otherworldly voice before a car peels out in the background. Sounds like it's right up against the mic, whispering, or scratching or something, and it sounds like a language, like some of it might even be English. So far, the only word I can distinguish is mine. Please, Mom. Mom, I need your help. But you can't tell anyone. This is going to have to be as private as possible. I'm afraid if I call you to discuss it, he might overhear the conversation. I don't really know if he can understand me at this point, but he doesn't like it when I try to leave, so I'm emailing you. It's my only option. If you know a priest or a pastor who's trustworthy and you can meet them in person and tell them about what's happening, I need their guidance as soon as possible. Please download my attached audio file and forward it to the police if something should happen to me. I love you, Mom. Please help me. I'm so scared. I'm exhausted trying to stand guard over myself. I don't know if John will try to come inside, but I'm not sleeping and the chanting doesn't end. Pray for me. And pray for John. Love. Davy. P.S. Lock your doors. Back before me and Olsen were partners, I was with this guy, Manth. He was a weird son of a bitch, but he was good at his job. He was on about a decade longer than me. He taught me quite a bit. Matter of fact, he's the one that told me that there would be times when I wouldn't be able to solve the case. Said it wouldn't be because of me or a lack of skill or anything like that. It wouldn't be the evidence. It wouldn't be the witness. Said there'd be times when, how'd he put it? You'd have all the pieces of the puzzle. You know what the puzzle should look like, but for a reason you don't know and you can't understand, they just won't fit. And back in the late 80s, we drew a suspected homicide at this apartment building. Real pile of crap. Neighbors had complained about a smell coming from one of the units, so some officers went to check it out and ended up, we'd get the call. The girl was found wrapped completely in dental floss. I mean, each of her fingers and toes were individually wrapped, as were each of her limbs and her torso and her ears and the rest of her head, and then another layer went over everything. It was wrapped so none of her skin was visible. Could you imagine that? How long that must have taken. There were no weave patterns either, they were just wrapped, and continued with each new wrap around, touching the one before. How much floss do you think that took? Hundreds of rolls, if not more, thousands maybe. Never seen anything like it, but then, it was just that one time. Anyway, they identified the girl. 17 years old she was, from a couple states over. Now, if I remember right, her name was, what was it? Kelly, that's it. Now, the guy who lives in the apartment hadn't been seen around the building for a couple of days, and we talked to the neighbors, people that lived on the same floor, a few others. Apparently this guy, his name was Lucas. He kept to himself. He went to talk with the neighbors. Now, none of them knew his name. A few of them, they'd go, "Oh, you mean that guy from whatever unit he was in, 512, I think, whatever it was. That guy's an asshole." Something to that effect. Never to talk to anybody, never nodded in the halls, nothing. He lived in the building 6 years, but for about the last year, 10 months or so, he'd been gone. Nobody'd seen him. His rent was paid by check through the mail. He had his mail forwarded to a P.O. box. To the scene, his apartment was dark. We'd shown up there in the morning about 9 a.m., but his apartment made it feel like it was midnight. He painted the windows black, same with the walls. But on the walls were, those cliche ransom letters, where all the words are made up of different letters cut out of magazines. It was that, but over every inch of every black wall in this place. Messages were disturbing. I don't remember what it was, not at all verbatim, but they were just these long sorts of vague confessions. It's almost the end. It's coming for me. Please stop, that type of stuff. It was a 2-bedroom apartment, and floor to ceiling, wall to wall, it was hundreds, thousands. Magazine letters making words that formed this guy's pleas for help. Fingerprint folks came in, they did their best. And like I said, this guy lived alone, never had a noise complaint, and no one ever saw him with anyone else. Neighbors in the next units over, across the hall, never heard a peep from his apartment, not even a TV or radio, but somehow there were no less than, what was it, 90 some odd different fingerprints all over his house. And weirder than that is that all the fingerprints were all carefully placed. Like, one person went up to the table, the wall, refrigerator, door, whatever, placed their thumb down. Then another person came up, placed their finger down. So on and so forth. The entire apartment, every surface, had these fingerprints, intricately placed, evenly spaced. We found out that the only ones that they identified, there were 2 sets of fingerprints, one belonging to Lucas, another to a woman who had died in West Virginia in the early 60s, a few years before he was born. So the girl that was found dead in the apartment, she had no connection to Lucas, anyone we could find. She has absolutely no fingerprints on her, but it didn't look like anyone had intentionally wiped her down. They said she'd been dead about a week, and the cause of her death was, get this, suffocation by dental floss. In the course of her autopsy, they found that a few of her organs were also wrapped in dental floss, the same way her body was. Her heart, her liver, her lung, her kidney, her spleen, all wrapped up in dental floss, and her stomach was bursting at the seams with it, just like her esophagus. Anyway, we had our suspect, this Lucas guy, started digging, looking for associates, placing his spent time, things like that. And pretty soon we find out that he did some of the off-the-books work at a landscaping company. Guy there tells us that he hadn't been to work in 3 days. We figured he quit. Well, pulled a few more threads, nothing seemed to pan out. Looked like this guy killed Kelly, went off the grid. And then about a week and a half after we get the case, we put Lucas's picture everywhere. And if I'm not mistaken, the higher-ups told us all to tell everyone it was for a robbery. We started getting calls from different businesses saying Lucas had come in. Stopped for gas, got a burger at McDonald's, picked up a shampoo at the grocery store. All these menial tasks, probably 15 different things. Problem was, he apparently did all these things at locations that spanned the whole city, and he did them all at the same damn time. 10:48 a.m., something like that. All the security footage matched up. His credit card records matched up. All the purchases happened at the exact same time, and I'll be damned if it wasn't him at the locations. Not lookalikes. Him. Now, a lot of the stuff I'm telling you, it's weird. It's weird, yeah? When it all happened, that's really all it was. It was just weird. Odd. It was never really all that scary. Some things were, of course, but generally it was just stuff that boggled the mind. Now, we watched these security tapes, though. It's hard to explain it. Me, man, and anyone who was in the room at the time, we watched these tapes. Every time I think there was 11 places we had to watch the tapes. Every time he'd stand for a few seconds, 5, 10 seconds. He would just stare at the camera, stone face. It was like he was looking into my soul. I can only describe how it felt for me. I don't know for a fact that the others felt the same way. It felt like someone was squeezing their fist around my heart. And the breath left me. I started sweating. It was the worst. It was fear. Pure terror. 2 of the security guards had to leave the room. One started hyperventilating, another threw up. It only lasted as long as he was looking straight at the camera. When he looked away, everyone would breathe a sigh of relief. It was... Anyway. Manth, he came to me the last day of us going over the security cameras. He told me that he had something. The son of a bitch had gone over the pictures from the apartment. All the magazine letters. Found a pattern. There were certain letters that were written in a particular font. He put those through a cipher, we call it a Caesarean shift. He moved the letters around, I don't remember how many, 4 or 5 times. It made a name they kept repeating. It was the longest of long shots, but we started looking into Bruce Hiller. Now, it turns out Bruce Hiller was another apartment over in a town near ours. We talked to the people there. They tell us he's the nicest guy in the world. I don't see him much, but whenever they do, he's polite, he's conversational, he's a really good guy. His apartment is, it's immaculate. I mean, it looked like he went over the entire place with a Q-tip every day, every hour. The building itself was, it was decent, kind of run down. It was his place. For what it was spotless. We go through everything, and pretty soon it's time to go check the basement storage unit. The way they set up was they were just partitioned off with little wooden wired doors. You'd see into everything. And Lucas's or Bruce's or whatever his damn name was. In his, it was packed floor to ceiling with stuff on either side of the door. But we could see through the door. There he was. And towards the back of the unit with his back to us, reaching up onto a shelf. Could barely see him, just kind of make out a silhouette. The only lights down here were a single bulb hanging from the ceiling with pull strings. Shine our lights in his unit, pull out our weapons. We tell him to turn around slowly, keep his hands up. He doesn't move. Stands there. He reaches up on the shelf. He moved forward a bit. We keep telling him to turn around, show us his hands, blah, blah, blah. He doesn't move an inch. Building manager has a rapport with him, apparently, so we get him, and he tries pleading with him to turn around. Lucas just kept standing there with his arms up and his back to us. Manager unlocks the door. We get him out of there. Now, this was a year or two before tasers really started catching on, so we didn't have that option. We inch our way towards the guy. And as we get closer, it becomes clear that when I say he isn't moving, he isn't moving. He's standing as still as a statue. Pretty soon we realize he's not breathing. And then we keep our weapons up, we keep our lights on him. And we keep yelling, all that stuff. Did it by the book. When we got up to him, I confirmed that he wasn't breathing when we called in the troops. When it was time to move the body, they had to tip him. It was rigor mortis that set in while he was reaching up to the shelf. It's on his face, though. It's the most anguished, terrified look I'd ever seen. Picture yourself screaming at the top of your lungs. Think about what your face looks like when you do that. That was his face. We asked the people who lived above his storage unit if they'd heard anything, and of course they hadn't. When Man saw the guy, who did something to him. I mean, I saw Lucas's face. It scared the Christ out of me. No 2 ways about it. Gave me that same feeling as when we watched the security tapes. But man, the guy never said another word, ever. He never spoke to me, his wife, his kids. Never said another word, for as far as I know. Last I heard, he was living in an old folks' home. Poor son of a bitch, just looks out the window all day. That was some years ago, though. I hope for his sake he's dead. As terrible as that sounds. And they did an autopsy, and well, it was something with his heart. I mean, it was blood pressure, something. What it came down to was that he was literally scared to death. I didn't think it was real. They assured us that it was the only explanation. That was it. He died. I never found anything else on his connection to the girl. Why he had an alias, why he had a second apartment, nothing. We did find what the tip of his finger was touching. It was reaching up on the shelf, though. It was a ball of dental floss. Maybe the size of, I don't know, racket ball, one of those bouncy blue ones. Well, I got a call a day or two later. And it told us inside that ball of dental floss was 7 human teeth. As far as I know, none of them ever been identified. I inherited Point Pine Oaks from my grandfather after my father wanted nothing to do with it. I, on the other hand, was broke, and I needed a place to stay and a job, and, well, beggars can't be choosers. So that's the answer to the question that I get asked any time that I'm out and about on the streets of our, town. How on earth did you get stuck with that place? Everyone can see what Point Pine Oaks is, which is an apartment building that is 6 stories tall with 12 apartments on each floor. The outside of the building looks pretty normal, just a brick building at the end of Rare Road, which is a cul-de-sac that contains no other buildings on the street except for Point Pine Oaks. My grandfather bought the building in late 2013. It's been abandoned for over 3 decades, and the town was eager for someone to buy it. It became his passion project, and he fixed it up in July of 2014, and the building soon became the biggest apartment building in all of Point Pine. Any resident of Point Pine knows that the Oaks are anything but normal, however. For starters, no one ever decides to move in. If people want an apartment, they had to go all the way to the opposite side of town where the apartment complex is. See, people don't move into the Oaks, they just kind of appear. Every 13th of the month, a new apartment appears until each floor has 12 of them. And then, the following year, a new floor appears to accommodate the next 12 apartments. Oh, and I suppose I should also mention, none of the residents are human. Well, at least, not normal, living humans. My grandfather made it very clear to me that humans do not live in Point Pine Oaks, with the exception of the owner, which is now me. He never explained to me why humans are not allowed in the Oaks, and I never really asked because it felt kind of like the kind of rule that you follow without asking any questions. The entire first floor houses people who have died outside of the town. See, anytime a prior resident of Point Pine dies, they wake up again here, in Point Pine. Usually they're put in some secluded house up on the mountains, but for reasons unknown, they all ended up here at the Point Pine Oaks in 2014. The second floor houses the creatures with the eyes that are too wide, teeth that are too sharp, and skin that is too green. They first appeared in Point Pine in 2015, and have been in charge of the farmers market since. They're relatively nice. They tend to mind their own business, but that doesn't mean that they don't still freak me out every time I see them in the building, with their incredibly long limbs dragging the floor. On the third floor is where the collectors live. The lead of the collectors is a 10-year-old Mary Lou Birmingham. Mary Lou is the one who collects children's teeth. Of course, she doesn't take them right out of their mouths. That would be horrifying. She sneaks into their homes after their baby teeth fall out and take them from under the pillows instead, like the Tooth Fairy. Most of the collectors are children, with the exception of Old Man Jones, who is, an old man. Some of the children collect dead bugs. Others collect less unsettling things, like flowers. But some collect the dirt from graves in the cemetery. On the fourth floor live all the people who died in 2017, when the bell tower appeared in the Windsor Park. Nobody ever figured out what the deal was with that bell tower. But exactly 12 people died that year as soon as they saw it. Once the people of Point Pine picked up on the pattern, they just stopped going to Windsor Park. Of course, after that, the bell on the tower would just ring every month and still manage to kill more people, but that's a different story. On the 5th floor are the invisible vampires, but we don't talk about them. The 6th floor appeared this year. And so far, the tenants of that floor were not of one specific species, and they don't seem to have anything in common. The first family to appear has no mouths and communicate by somehow talking inside my head. In February, one of the sacrifices from the Point Pine parade showed up. In March, it was a headless man. April brought a family of kukuis that almost made me have a heart attack the first time I saw them. They were by far the most horrifying residents of the building. Their huge red eyes that rattled around in their skulls and their decaying black skin that was crawling with maggots. On opening their mouths, the building shook with a horrible screeching sound that was like nails on a chalkboard at 600% volume. In May, a seemingly normal-looking family moved in, which terrified me just a bit more than the kukuis had, until they invited me to dinner and I watched their lower jaws drop to their shoulders as each one ate an entire raw chicken in one bite. June brought a demon, who would routinely set fires in the building, but other than that, it appeared to stay out of everyone else's way. And last month brought the Wendigos, which were by far the hardest to deal with. We had to come up with an arrangement that they would only eat the undead folks on the first floor, since they would just wake up in the apartment again the next day, and therefore they wouldn't technically be hurting anyone. Today, the new apartment didn't appear until noon. This was odd because they usually appear right at midnight on the 13th. I stood at the 6th floor staring at the empty wall until a door suddenly appeared. Apartment number 68. I took a few breaths to prepare myself for whatever hideous monster would answer the door, and then I lifted my hand to knock. "Coming!" someone called from inside. I heard footsteps to approach, and then the door opened up in front of me. "Hi!" There was a woman standing in the apartment. She looked normal enough, tall, blonde, with a tattoo of a rose on her left forearm. Hi. I'm the owner of the building, the landlord. My name's Erik." I extended my hand out, bracing myself for some sort of heat or coldness or shock. "I'm Gwen. Nice to meet you." She shook my hand with a strong grip. It was a normal handshake, but I wasn't going to relax just yet. I needed to give it a few minutes to know what exactly these new residents were. "No, come in. I'll introduce you to my family." I slowly followed her into the apartment. I looked around. Seemed pretty normal. Then again, all the apartments seem normal. It's a thing that lives inside that isn't normal. "Hey guys, come out here," Gwen called into the apartment. "Would you like some water?" she asked. No thanks," I replied. I turned at the sound of footsteps to see two kids and another woman walk out into the kitchen. "This is my wife, Laura, and our kids, Kimberly and Christopher." "Nice to meet you." Laura stuck out her hand, and I shook it. Again, it was normal. "I'm Erik. I'm the owner of the building," I replied. "Nice to meet you." There was a brief moment of awkward silence. So, do you have any questions?" I asked. The kids took off as I stood there with Gwen and Laura. "Oh, yeah. So what are the rules? Are we allowed to, paint the walls, hang stuff up?" Gwen asked. "Oh, yeah, you can decorate the place however you want," I replied. "Awesome!" she exclaimed. So if you don't mind me asking, what are you? I asked, fidgeting with my hands. "Excuse me?" Laura asked. What are you? I don't mean to be offensive or anything. I'd like to know. Laura and Gwen exchanged glances. "Like lesbians? Are you allowed to ask that?" Gwen asked, narrowing her eyebrows. No, I mean, I mean, like, what are you? I know you're not human. Laura laughed. "Not human? What are you talking about? What do you think we are? Like, magical creatures?" "I don't know. That's why I'm asking. I mean, your neighbors are Wendigos. There's a family of kukui down the hall." I pointed out the door. "Is this some kind of a joke? Is it because we're new?" Gwen asked. No, I replied, confused. Well then, we're just regular humans." Laura chuckled awkwardly. I stared at them. "Haven't you ever seen humans before?" No, I mean, not a regular one, at least not in this building." "Okay, now you're freaking me out," Gwen said. Do you not know where you are?" I asked. "Well, we're in Colorado, right?" Laura asked. "No, This isn't Colorado. What do you mean? Where are we then? Point Pine, I replied. Where? Gwen asked. You're in Point Pine. It's a small town, middle of nowhere. Laura ran to the window in the living room and pulled up the curtains and gasped. What is it? Gwen asked, turning around. Their window had a view of some of the buildings down below, along with a giant sign right outside. Welcome to Point Pine. Population unknown. I don't understand. Yeah, me neither. How do we get here? Gwen asked. I shrugged. I don't really know how people get here. They sort of just show up. Okay, then how do we get to Colorado? Laura asked, backing away from the window. You don't, I replied. What do you mean? I mean, you can't willingly leave Point Pine once you're here. Everyone who leaves gets banished. Even then, when you die out there, you wake up here. And you're stuck again, I replied. Gwen sighed and Laura ran her hands through her black hair. So, you don't know why we're here? Laura asked. I shook my head. If you're really just human, this can't be good. After a few minutes of silence, I left the apartment and decided to go outside to get some fresh air. I stepped onto the elevator and pressed the button to the first floor. I got off and made my way down to the doors, stopping as I reached out to open it. I looked down at the watch on my wrist. It was still noon. That wasn't possible. I'd been up in the apartment for at least 20 minutes, but that wasn't the only thing that was wrong. It was pitch black outside. Couldn't even see the sidewalk right outside the door. A giant tree that was a few feet in front of the building. I pressed my forehead against the glass, squinting to see if I could make out something in the darkness. Suddenly, someone crashed into the glass, causing me to jump back just a few feet in fright. Holy hell! I gasped. Hey, open the door! I walked closer and realized that I recognized the person who was outside. It was Lee. Everyone knew who he was since he lost his eyes to the Point Pine parade years ago. Lee? I asked. Open the door! I had heard that he had gotten his eyes back at the farmer's market, and now that I was seeing him, I could see that it was true. I reached out to open the door, but it was stuck. I tried again, pulling on the door as hard as I could, but it didn't budge. It's stuck, I said. Suddenly Lee went flying backwards, and I watched, and the darkness lifted, and the sun came out again. I looked down at my watch again. Still noon. When I looked back up, I found myself standing in the hallway of the 6th floor again, as apartment number 68 appeared in front of me once again. I reached out and knocked. Coming! Someone called from inside. Footsteps approached, and the door opened in front of me. Hi! Gwen? I asked. Yeah, who are you? She asked. Erik. We just spoke, I said. I'm sorry, you must be confused. You must have me confused with someone else. I didn't reply. I stared into the apartment as Laura and the kids came out. That was at least an hour ago. But the same chain of events keeps repeating every few minutes. The time has not moved past noon. I don't know how to undo it. I don't even know what it is. I'm pretty sure I know what's causing it. Humans shouldn't live in Point Pine Oaks. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I just wanted to say thank you for watching today's video. I want to try to wrap this video up quick, so I'm going to let you know about a couple of things real quick. First one is, I'm going on tour. If you want to check out more information about that, head over to creepypasta.shofetti.com. That's creepypasta.shofetti.com. If you want to support the show, head over to patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta, and if you'd like to buy some nice warm tea for a dark and stormy story time, check out etsy.com/shop/ivorymonocletea. Sweet dreams, kids.